All right, Entree Architect community, it's 4 p.m. Eastern, which means it's time for the Entree Architect Context and Clarity live conversation for March 3rd, 2022. Thanks for joining us. As you get here, let us know that you're here and let us know where you're joining this conversation from. If we've never met before, my name is Jeff. I'm in Indianapolis. I come here every weekday afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern for one reason, so that we can find clarity around the things that matter most to you, the architect. Doesn't matter if you're the employee of a firm or you own your own firm. Maybe you've circled a date on the calendar and you've said 2022 is my year and you're on the runway to starting your own thing. Or maybe you have owned your own firm for a year or 10 years or 29 years and you're starting to rethink or reimagine what that firm could or maybe even should be. All of the topics that we cover, one topic every day, they all fall under the broad umbrella of the business of architecture, and they're all the need to know topics for the success of small firm architects just like you. So thanks for joining me today. As usual, for these Context and Clarity live conversations, I'm joined by Katharine MacPhail, my trusty co-host. Katharine, hello, how are
I don't know,
you?
trusty. Hi, Jeff. I'm all right. How are you doing?
It's
Sometimes
all
I'm a
about
loose cannon. Hopefully today I won't be.
it's all about trust. Welcome
Right.
back. Glad you're joining us. Katharine is joining us from outside of Boston. We're outside of Boston,
I'm in Arlington, Massachusetts.
Arlington, Massachusetts.
Yep.
Beautiful Arlington, Massachusetts. Let's see. Let's
It's
look and
kind of beautiful.
see. Is it a gray day? If not, it's coming.
Well, I thought you meant like the town itself.
Oh, okay. Kind of beautiful.
I wouldn't go that far with saying it's beautiful, but
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
pretty okay.
Pretty okay. Arlington, Massachusetts. It says that.
That's
It's a
it. It
Chamber of
says it all.
Commerce moment right there. It says it right on the sign.
Yep.
Pretty okay. Let's see. Scott Thrift is out there in San Francisco. He says it's partially cloudy and partially sunny. Oh, he's in Oregon. Still in Oregon. Weather report is always right. Welcome back, Scott. Glad you're joining us. He's over on the Facebook side. He's the first in today, which, at least on my screen, which means that he is the winner of today's John Kinney Memorial Crocheted Bathtub Award. Christian's joining us from Ithaca, New York. Matthew, hello, Matthew. Glad you're back with us today. John Jones is joining us from Westport, Connecticut. Jay Caroli from the Sticks of Vermont. Welcome back, Jay. Benita, thanks for the wave in Atlanta. Mark LePage says, hello, my friends. 80 degrees and sunny blue skies in Waxhaw, North Carolina. Well, enjoy that 80 degrees.
Yeah.
Jay says it's 13 degrees. Touche. It's 13 degrees in northern Vermont right now. Let's see. Rod says it's 78 in Monroe, Louisiana. So there you go. You get the weather report from at least the eastern part of the United States. I see a lot of people joining us from Facebook right now, which is fantastic. I don't see anybody right now from LinkedIn or YouTube or Twitch or Twitter, which is curious. Usually we do. Maybe they're just running late. If you are on Facebook, for instance, and you're commenting, but your comments aren't showing up on the right side of the screen, here's a little housekeeping for you. If that's the case, you need to give Facebook permission to talk to Restream. We're streaming today for the first time, Context and Clarity Live, into the Architects and Allies group. So this may apply to folks in that group. You need to give Facebook permission to talk to Restream because you're in a private group. So there's a URL in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen right now. Take that, put that into your browser window. It's chat.restream.io/FB, as in Facebook. And a couple of clicks later, and you will the permission will be granted, and you'll be commenting and showing up on the screen like the ones that you see right now. So if that's not if you're commenting now, it's not popping up on the screen for you, try that. Chat.restream.io/FB in your browser, not in the Facebook comments, but in your browser. It'll take you to a separate site. A couple clicks later, permission will be granted. If you are on Twitch or Twitter or LinkedIn or YouTube right now and you're commenting, it's not showing up, try to use that same and shorten it, maybe YT or something like that. We've never encountered that really. So I'm actually just kind of making that up, but I suspect that's the way it works. For whatever that's worth. But hopefully we're streaming okay to the other places as well. All right. What have I'm certainly left something out in terms of housekeeping.
Hmm.
Anything?
I don't know. I think you've covered it.
Covered it. I talked long
I
enough
should
to
take
cover everything.
notes. Yeah, I should take notes next time. Check it
Yeah,
off
there's
when you
not that
say it.
much to it. But
No,
yeah, we need the checklist. All right. Well,
something like
we're going
that.
to run with it then. I think we've covered everything. Again, the URL's in the bottom left of the screen. Mark says YouTube's working, so that's good. So we've gone that far. So hopefully, we'll have more friends joining us from all the other platforms here momentarily. Leah says, thanks for the comments tip. Welcome, Leah. Glad you're joining us today. And anybody else, if you've never joined us for Context and Clarity Live before, where we do this simulcast to all the platforms, the chat.restream.io/FB is important to you because that's how the comments will go from Facebook to here on the screen with us. So I'm going to leave that up in the lower left here for another couple minutes in case anybody needs it. But we have an important guest in the green room right now. We've left plenty of green M&Ms for them. I'm going to check and make sure they're not still chewing on green M&Ms before we bring them in. Get the thumbs up from the green room, so we're okay. There's no green M&Ms in their teeth. So why don't I go ahead and introduce our guest for today. Our guest today is an architect and an activist, change maker, and a historian of sorts. She's the 315th living African American woman architect in the United States, a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, the 2021 AIA Whitney M. Young Jr. Award recipient, a senior associate at Adjaye Associates Architects, and the founder and executive director of Beyond the Built Environment. Pascale Sablan, welcome to Context and Clarity Live.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. I'm glad you're here. We have been waiting all week for this conversation. And for those of you that are new to Context and Clarity Live, we actually have Context and Clarity conversations every weekday afternoon. And what we do is we say, okay, on Thursday, we're going to talk to Pascale on Context and Clarity Live. We have some idea of what we're going to talk with her about, and we shape the entire week around that theme. So we started out this week talking about being inclusive. On Tuesday, we talked about alignment. Yesterday, we talked about celebrating diversity and diverse cultures. And so we've been sort of building up to this conversation with you today, and we're really looking forward to a conversation about how do we frame it? Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, I suppose, to
That's right.
just kind of give it a general frame. I said in the intro that you are the 315th living African American woman architect in the United States. Hopefully, I got all of that in the right order. How do you know what that number is?
So the way it worked is that Bradford C. Grant and Dennis Mann launched the Directory of African American Architects. And as you became licensed, you gave your proof of that accomplishment, then they were able to add your name to that directory. And if somebody passed away, they would move their name off of that list. And so that would kind of give you who we are. And at the time, I think there was about 12 of us who had passed away. In that capacity. And that's why I always make it a point to say living, because I don't want to be part of that force of erasure that takes away the very important accomplishments of those important 12 women before me. And so that I think is important because it's very rare for me to see, before kind of engaging it professionally from academia and early parts of my career, it was very rare for me to see another person of color, specifically African American women, practicing architects. And so when I say 315th, I'm kind of both acknowledging the rarity that I bring to the table, but also that I'm part of a collective, and that we're growing forward, and that it's a metrics that we're tracking because we want to manage it, right? We want to make it better. And actually, when I elevated to the College of Fellows, I ended up being the 20th African American woman to ever reach the College of Fellows, and the second in all of New York.
Wow.
And the youngest African American to ever reach that distinction. And so again, I speak to that because we take it for granted, right? We see the names, those acronyms after people's names everywhere, and we just assume that it's more common than it isn't than it is, and it actually isn't. So I try to proclaim this in two folds: a, that there's an awareness for that, but then it also encourages other BIPOC designers to submit, to apply, to put themselves out there, and to be recognized for their work and for their accomplishments and their contributions to the built environment.
Yeah, that's I'm glad you're doing that. And this morning on Clubhouse, so again, those of you that are not familiar with everything that is context and clarity, every morning, every weekday morning, we're over on the Clubhouse app. We call it our coffee talk at 9 a.m. Eastern. And we were talking about the 315 for a few minutes, and and it's absolutely staggering, I guess, that if we have, I don't know, roughly 100 and some odd thousand registered or licensed,
115,000 registered architects in the United States.
115,000 currently, and historically you're 315, which is a incredibly small number, right, in the overall. And so so we were talking about the importance of that number, I guess, this morning. And I guess that really kind of goes to everything that you're working on right now.
Yeah, and also, kind of speaking to that, roughly, I believe we're still slightly below 2,500 African American registered architects in the United States in total, right? And NOMA, and I believe the large firm roundtable, I believe, has a pledge called the 2030 Challenge, which is
Mhm.
to reach 5,000 registered African American architects by 2030. And to do that, we would need to get about 2024 newly registered architects every month between now and 2030. And in actuality, we're hitting maybe one, two per month,
Yeah.
right? And so it's not just a willingness of like us to become licensed, but what are the structural changes that we're doing
Mm.
to include that, to make it happen? Are we making sure that the test is equitable? Are we making sure that we have access to the information? Are we making sure that the education required is within reach of somebody who's socioeconomically disadvantaged? We have to really consider the full pipeline. Also, how do we incentivize those who've been practicing in the field for years, decades, who never got licensed? And so really trying to be strategic and multifaceted in trying to increase those numbers. And I'm a very positive person. I believe we can make all things happen, but this is definitely a task that will require all hands on deck, all parts of the pipeline to be examined and to be modified to allow for that kind of growth. And I really hope that we make it, and hopefully some of the work that I'm doing is helping making an impact and getting us closer to that goal.
Yeah, you bring up a good point about all the different ways that you would attempt to meet that goal. And someone brought up, I don't remember which day this week it was, but they brought up basically the path to the profession. And this is actually because I teach a class. And we're actually going through accreditation like right now as we speak, or reaccreditation as we speak. One of the pushes is conversation, and I assume this is driven by NAB, but I don't actually know that for sure. I haven't fact checked that, but pushing the path to licensure, I guess, or path to the profession conversation. And I like to include path to and path from. What do you do? How did you get here? So the class I teach is in master's program, MArch program. How did you get to this point? And for my class, it's often somewhat varied. What do you do now, and where do you go from here? But what came up in conversation one day this week was I think many times, and you tell me what you think about this, but I think many times there's leadership in firms that have this idea, oh, this is what being an associate, what needs to lead to being an associate, or this is what an employee needs to have, and it's a very narrowly framed path. But I don't think we meet your goal if we keep a very narrow path and say you've got to take step 1, 2, 3, XYZ, without kind of, I guess, again, talking about diversity, different ways to the profession.
Right. And I think that's important because it's by no means is anyone asking for the bar to be lowered. And I want to be
Right.
very clear about that, right? We're not asking for the bar to be lowered, but what we are asking is that we take a look at the systems to see if there's embedded racist and sexist components that is hindering qualified people from consideration, right? And when we talk about from the lens of a firm structure, right, that requirements of what it takes to go from a junior architect to a architect lead in your office, those steps and what it takes to get there is very ambiguous and not very is not published, right? And it requires you to create a relationship with leadership that helps guide you and mentor you in that capacity. And so if you do not connect with one of the leaders, you really are outside of that know. So part of the justice building there is to have and encourage firms to publish what it requires for promotions. What is exactly their role for your title, right? Sometimes people are like, oh, you're underperforming. Okay, where was the list that told me what you required and expected from me in the first place? Right. And so that's something that we need to recognize is the access to information and ensure that the criteria in which we're looking at is equitable. Same thing with the hiring process. Depending on who's interviewing you, are you prioritizing one thing versus the next? What if we encourage firms to create scorecards that allows for the consistency of how you're evaluating candidates from one to another? And so I think it's really about thinking about, again, systematic ways of changing the opacity of becoming a licensed architect is really critical. So when we have these fun programs with kids and we're like, yeah, you could be an architect, it's not just about coloring books. We got to be honest about what it takes. We got to tell them, oh, there's a difference between an accredited program and a non-accredited program. And if you go to this, you're going to need to invest in additional years of education. Some students don't know that. When we think about what schools provide B-Arch degrees, the price point of the tuition, right? And then ultimately, if you even go further forward to that, what incentivizes a person of color to enter the profession if the profession doesn't serve their communities typically, right? Right? And so to some, architecture and design is amazing when it's designed for you. But when it is not designed for you and it's actually designed to oppress you, you're not trying to be part of that team. So we actually need to reshape our relevance to communities, specifically those who are socioeconomically challenged, to understand that we are not just beholden to the clients that cut our checks, but to everyone who's impacted by our projects. And their voice in developing and designing these buildings are necessary to make something comprehensive and design excellence, to be quite honest and fair, that echo these ethoses of sustainability, of justice, of equity. And so to me, really, when we're thinking about this, it has to be a fully systematic way of fundamentally supporting the pipeline. And it really requires each of us to kind of identify where in the pipeline is authentic to us of where we care about and put in the work. And mentoring is not the one and only answer, because if that was the case, we'd be done like a decade ago, right? And so as we have these conversations and conferences and seminars and more conversations and polls about this topic, I'm like, yo, these top conversations are great. Where's the action? What's the plan? What is the metrics we're striving for? What are the steps? Who are we enlisting? Who are we serving? Did we ask them if they wanted this, right? These are all the things we need to ensure that we're not helicoptering into these spaces, and also recognizing that my voice in the matter is mine. I am not speaking for all African American women. We are not the same. Our needs are not the same. And so therefore, to really isolate and listen to one or two voices also is a problem that's not really going to address a very large systematic issue. And that's why I'm really proud to also be the president-elect of NOMA, the National Organization of Minority Architects. And I will be the 5th woman ever to hold that position of power in the organization's 50-year legacy. And now, as a 6th collateral, we get to meet with NAB and NCARB and ACSA and AIA and AIAS, and make sure that we're thinking about this on all those different levels and saying, here's what we think could work. What are the blockages and the things that are challenging you on your end? How can we diversify the boards? How can we create more access? So yes, I think there needs to be both high-level conversations with heads of organizations that have systematic impact, but it also needs to be grassroots. We all need to be demanding this justice, not just for those who are most disenfranchised by the work.
One of the things, speaking maybe of the grassroots level, the individual level, perhaps, and I know, I'm sure we'll talk about beyond the built environment and say it loud, some of your initiatives. Um, but one of the things that's come up this week is this idea of elevating voices and giving everybody a voice and letting everybody know that their voice is welcome and valued and all of that. And a question that has come up is how do you how do you engage someone and encourage someone, invite someone to speak when they quite likely have been taught that their voice isn't as valuable or is less than? Do you have an approach for bringing people to the table that have experienced that?
Absolutely, and I think, and I know we'll get to talk to it a little bit further down in this conversation, but the Say It Loud exhibitions, where I elevate women and BIPOC designers through their work, is a self-submitting platform, right? I can't submit you. You have to say I am worthy of this elevation, right? And so I'm starting to flex that muscle. I myself has never been abashed about sharing my news, and I think that is because I have 9 siblings. There's 10 of us. And there's a very common, saying, closed mouths don't get fed. You know what I'm saying? So I got to be like, yo, mom, I got an A today. Or, and I noticed that some of my siblings were more quiet. And like, Patrick got a 100 on his quiz. And I was so happy in celebrating my family's wins, that as if they were my wins. And I was the annoying sister that would embarrass you if I was, did you know that they just got promoted? Did you know they got student of the year? Whatever. And so I just started to apply that here in a professional setting to say, we have been taught specifically not to be too boastful, especially as women. And I'm going to put my woman hat on, right? That, you don't put too much of yourself out there and that it's too boisterous. But at the same time, every firm has a marketing department, right? These marketing departments is putting your excellence out there. And so we need to kind of think about that as we talk about ourselves and as we position our contributions to the built environment. The other component that I think is quite important is that we're also taught to think that projects are designed and executed by one person, right? You'll have this gigantic skyscraper that kisses the moon, and then say, this is the one and only architect who designed it. That's not true. That's not fair. That's not accurate. Nothing takes one person to do, including my hair. It's a whole group effort, everything we work on, especially architecture and design. And so thousands of people participate in getting a project built. And so I'm asking everyone to claim their role. I'm not saying be false or lie about it, but hey, if you spent 2 years developing the residential plan of this master plan, that's yours. That's your contribution. You should claim that. And we should not be pushing anybody aside for that as well. As well as, I don't appreciate that we also be told this is the one and only woman that we can herald at this time. Zaha Hadid holding it down for a long time. And then now it's like, all right, now it's Jeannie Gay. No, we can talk about and celebrate 1,000 women architects at the same time. Why not? Why are we prioritizing one at a time? No. And so again, with my exhibitions, it's about elevating women and BIPOC designers of their local community so that their local community can see them. And also they get that reinforcement of like, oh, wow, I go to that library. Oh, I attend that school. You're the person who does it. Well, I might be interested in architecture. Let me follow you on LinkedIn. Let me follow you on Instagram. Let me go to a lecture you're doing. Let me listen to your Context and Clarity live interview, right? You makes us a more accessible to people who are considering the profession, especially since it's so opaque. So yes, a lot of times we are told to keep our voices quiet. And so I am trying to structure programs and platforms that amplify that. And also when I am included or invited to a table, I am flipping tables over. I am not sitting there quiet. I am absolutely have my agenda. I'm very clear about what I'm looking for. I'm unapologetic about it. And if I have power to yield, I'm yielding it to moving that mission forward. So if it's like, I'm not approving this, whatever it is, until we have a higher percentage allocated, that's my stance. And nobody should ever be shocked by that when I'm in a space. And so that also is to say, for those who do have the power to be in those spaces, to make that authority in those claims, you have to make opportunities for others. You cannot just sit in it for yourself. It doesn't work. You have to make that the opportunity to pull 3 more people forward. Every time I step off of a board, I offer them 3 other women of color to replace me. that is important for them to be able to note that it's not just my voice that's in the lead of this conversation, but there's other identities and very qualified people who can be there as well.
You, Forbes magazine described you as actively changing history. And we talked about this for a second before we went live. I think, first of all, that's an intriguing, incredible quote, actively changing history. But, we're sort of looking forward and backwards here at the same time, going back to the 315. And I think it's really important to understand that a lot of us are not aware of the full history. I said this earlier this week. I live in Indiana. We made the national news, maybe international news recently, that there was a there was a letter that went home in a school district that said, hey, it was during February, it's during Black History Month. Hey, we're going to be talking about some things. If you want to opt your kid out of these conversations. It never said Black History Month, but we know that's what it was about, right? If you want to opt your kid out, sign this form and send it back. Absolutely ridiculous. I think the importance of what you're doing can't be overstated, because we need to understand that history. We need to know how we got to this point.
Yeah, I think the ambiguity of knowledge is not just for you, it's for all of us. And so part of me also holding the historian role, which I just gave up from NOMA, is making sure that we're teaching how to keep history, right? We're making that an ideal and important part of our profession, is to keep record. And so by having Be Say Loud exhibitions and it be traveling activation, every time we have an exhibition in a new location, we're cultivating, unearthing, excavating, and celebrating women and BIPOC designers of that area. And as of today, we have hosted 27 Say It Loud exhibitions. The 28th will be in 2 weeks in Australia, in Melbourne. And I have been collectively gathering the information from all these exhibitions and made a great diverse designers library that keeps track of everyone who's ever been in the exhibition. And now we're at 674 in the library. And why that's important is because I talk about mentoring small kids and doing these project pipeline camps in K through 12 with AIA. And I also often wonder what happens to these kids after they leave. When they research architects, what do they see, right? So I typed in the words great architects in my Google browser, and Google came up with 50 names and faces in a banner at the bottom. And in that 50, one was a woman, a few minorities, and 0 were African American. And I'm talking from a range of currently practicing contemporary architects all the way to Michelangelo and Raphael. This is a large breadth of time. And in this time between now and when architects were Ninja Turtles, there's only been one woman who had a significant role that can be called great. No African Americans? Absolutely not. And so I went to Google's headquarters in New York, and I asked the question, why is this the result? And they said, Pascale, there's literally not enough content out there that call you all great. Hence, why it's the Great Diverse Designers Library, and everybody featured. Their bio begins with the great architect, the great designer, the great urban planner. I'm enforcing the language of great to challenge the SEO. But I'm also trying to create a repository of information that is completely and always accessible to all. And then I also launched another initiative as part of my Dismantling Injustice initiative called Say It With Media. And what I'm doing there is asking media, print, and publications to track and publish the amount of women and BIPOC designers that they put out in their platforms per year, and increase it by 5% annually until a minimum of 15% is reached. Now, the reason for this, like I love, my favorite quote is, you can't manage what you don't measure. And so, yes, everybody's saying, yay, 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 more diversity. And we definitely see the push in February for Black History Month. And we see the push in March for Women's Month. And we see the push again in September, October. It's like, okay, but can we do this all year round? Can we be committed to following this content? And the first thing they always say is, we're scared we won't have enough content. And I said, don't you worry. I got Say It Loud exhibitions coming everywhere across the world. There's constantly going to be content for you. And if you really think we're not already here doing amazing work, just it hasn't been shined the light on us, you're disadvantaged, right? And so far we have six publications who signed up, and we have a collective 353,000 monthly impressions from the publications who signed up. And that I say to my community, right? These are the publications who care to hear your story. When you finish a project, this is who you're sending those images and those narratives to, because they want to celebrate you. And I'm asking us, all of us in this community, to reach out to these publications and say, can you sign on to this pledge? Because I personally have touch point with every single major publication in architecture and landscape. And there's a lot of hesitation. But yeah, it's true, because it's just me asking. But what if there was one day where we all sat down and we all sent that email? And so on the webpage now, I have a thumbnail for every publication, their estimated monthly impression. And when you click the thumbnail, an email auto-populated with their contact information for the executive editor or whoever that would need to comes up, and you can say, I want you to sign up for this pledge, and push that agenda forward. But I think really it's not just a matter about us documenting ourselves, although important. And it's not just a matter of heralding us during the few months of the year that it's focused on. But it's also recognizing that it takes the industry of publications to take on this role also, to amplify our voice, amplify our work at the same time.
That is a very strong statement and a very strong commitment, and I applaud you for that. I am so my challenge to everybody in the audience right now, and we will get the link that Pascale is talking about, and we'll get it up on the screen for you. And my challenge to all of you is to do exactly what Pascale just did, or just said. Reach out to these publications and make the ask, make the demand, if you want to call it that. So here on the screen momentarily, you will see it's going to be really long on the screen, but we could figure it out here.
My bad. I didn't make a busy.
No, it fit perfect. So there it is, beyondthebuiltenvironment.com, which go to beyondthebuilt.com, and you'll find all the information about Beyond the Built Environment, Say It Loud, and all the rest of the initiatives that are connected. But beyondthebuilt.com/say it with media, hyphens between the words there. It's on the bottom of the screen right now. So that's the challenge to everybody in the audience, is to go to that URL. Once this conversation is over, don't leave right now. We've got more to talk about.
Yes, please stay with me.
Go there. Yeah, go there. Go there and make the ask of those publications. Katharine, is it? I don't think the comment that you were talking about is going to fit on the screen. Is it easier just to read it?
Yeah, I mean, basically, so Rod says he has a serious comment for once. I live in the Deep South in a city with more African-American residents than white. I've met a lot of professionals here who are not white. For example, my dentist, GP, endocrinologist, retina doctor, and cornea doctor, yes, I have a lot of doctors, are all people of color. My comment is that many professionals are people of color, but they tend to gravitate to medicine and law. Has a comparison been done between professions in regard to BIPOC?
Well, I'm not sure if the comparison has been done specifically, but I can tell from my personal experience as a child of Caribbean parents, I only had two options: to be either a doctor and or lawyer growing up, because
and
these
or
huh?
You could be both, and or doc. You could be both. They would be okay with that.
You know what? Those were my options. So if you want to do a combination of it, do that.
Yep.
But like, those were the two to figure it out. And
Okay.
I think it's because these professions are so highly respected and regarded, and there's a little bit more of a knowledge about what they do, and they see the impact and how they can serve people, right? And so I think when we think about that, it's the messaging about the profession itself and how do we get out there. And I think it goes back to what I said before about us being villains in some communities. And so I do applaud a lot of different organizations like NCARB and AIA and NOMA, who are starting to track that information and how we compare. I also know that there's organizations called, I think it's called the Missing 32%, which is run by Rosa Shang out in California, which specifically starts to think about and target women and what are the things that are challenging women in the profession. So I think there's different interest groups who have kind of acknowledged kind of the disparities and have been running these reports and surveys. And so I think it's important that, again, we keep tracking these things so that we can understand it and start formalizing strategies to it. But I think it really is about how many movies and TV shows do you see doctors and lawyers as this really amazing hero character, and then how many movies do you see architects actually doing architecture in these same kind of media outlets? So I think it's really about us becoming relevant to our communities so that they think about us as a viable professional trajectory. And that was actually something that my parents were very apprehensive about when I said I wanted to become an architect, to the point where they signed me up to What's an Architect seminar in New York at One Penn Plaza. That's right when Metro cards came out. So I learned how to take the train to the city. And it was a group of 30 students. I was the only woman, but we went to construction sites, newly constructed projects. We went to architecture firms. We went to a model shop. It was amazing because it really solidified my desire to be an architect in high school before I filled out those applications to architecture school. So I say all this to say, it's really about when are we introducing people to the profession? How are we supporting them into the process of coming in, right? And then kind of getting through. And then lastly, it's a quick story that I think most people have heard about me before, is during my first/second week of college in architecture school, a professor asked me and another student to stand. And so we stood up thinking we're being volunteered to start an effort or whatever. And he said, okay, so these two, for example, will never become architects because they're Black and because they're women. And okay, you guys can sit down now. That was the lesson of the effing day, right? So I sat down
That's
shocked.
so shocking. That is shocking. I can't believe anybody would do that.
Okay,
That's
so
awful.
hold that thought, Catherine. Hold
Okay.
that thought. So I sit down. My peer to my left, Simon C., I'll never forget, said, Pascale, that better not be the reason why you stop. You better persevere and prove him wrong, right? And that was the words me as a competitive person needed to hear to persevere through that moment. But when I do my public speaking in my lectures, I often ask the audience to stand if they've ever been told that they're inadequate because of their gender and race. And people are standing. People are standing in schools of architecture. People are standing in conferences. People are standing in professional settings. And so what I'm trying to say is that it's upsetting, it's shocking, but it doesn't just happen to me. It is actually part of the system of maintaining a reduced number of women and people of color in the profession. And that's why I'm asking for schools to really say, what is the system's accountability when professors say some things like this? Right? How are we creating an opportunity for students who feel a level of discrimination to even report it? So we need to actually hold people accountable to these unjust conversations and statements, and be able to make sure that it's clear to everyone that it is inaccurate as a statement, it is false clearly, and that it will not be condoned. And if your school don't want to put in that kind of structure, then you should lose your NAB accreditation. And I'm in those board meetings pushing that agenda. So, I mean, we'll see what happens. But I know a lot of people say, like, when it comes to justice, you have to have people be willing to make the change. You can't force it. I'm a person that's like, no, there's people been suffering for long enough. This is the forcing. And if y'all don't want to do it, let's have a robust conversation about it. And let's talk about it through. But I think it's really important that we start advising and creating ways of accountability so that these things that are happening are not happening moving forward, and disenfranchising and stopping more people to continue on. And I feel lucky because it was just one moment. And that's why I can speak to it. I can say, I remember the day. I remember who I sat next to. I remember how I reacted. I remember who the other person was. But imagine there's some students who that was their constant everyday experience. There's people who work in firms that's their constant everyday experience. And that's not right.
You mentioned that was sort of the motivation. You didn't use the word motivation, but that was what motivated you. That wasn't the point of that statement, though, was it? That was a statement.
It was because, I don't know if you all know, but in architecture school, when I started, the first week, it felt like every class was about how not all of you are going to last. Like, look to your left, look to your right. Only 20% of you are going to graduate. This is a very rigorous program. If this really isn't for you, you should leave the program now. So it was kind of like this kind of setting up the expectation of the intensity of the architecture program and curriculum that was pretty consistent from class to class, just to make sure that it was clear that this wasn't going to be like a chill kind of major. So for him, he was basically just trying to say, there's people in here who just simply don't have it in them to cut it. So I'll give you these 2 points. And it's a class of what, 50, 60 students? And there was only two of us. So, I mean, and when we studied and went to think about the great architects that I was being taught, none of them were Black women. So is it that he was being vicious or mean, or he was speaking to his truth of what he had learned and what he had come across? And so that was all part of kind of that system. And I thank him for giving me such purpose, right? I said this was my mission moment, because at this point I realized that whenever I walk into a space, I'd always be representing more than Pascale, right? I'm always representing my gender and race. And so therefore, I have to show up and show out at every moment, at any time, because my efforts cannot be the reason why someone else loses an opportunity. I have to be the reason why more opportunity is created. So that means, oh, I mean, I'm feeling really sick, I have a fever. No, I can't be the Black girl that doesn't go to class. I have to. And so having that privilege of having that purpose so early on really drove me through my academic career. There's a lot of times I was like, you know what? Nah, he's not going to be right today. I'm going to get this project through. I'm going to figure out how to do statistics. I'm going to do this. I'm going to pass these tests, right? And this is all part of that initiative. But in others, that might have broke them, and rightfully so. That was a lot. That was a lot to carry. And so I say all this to say it wasn't that I was being disruptive or anything in class. I just think it was his truth, and he was sharing it as a fact because that's all that he knew. And therefore, as we build these libraries of the great diverse designers and have all these exhibitions, it's so that we can expand the horizons of what the great architects look like, not just to those who look like me, but those who look like my professor as well, because he equally needed to see us flourishing in this capacity for him to understand that as well.
Have you written to him?
No, I actually refused to remember his name. I said, you have too much prominence in my purpose already. This is all you get. But back in 2018, I was given the Pratt Institute Alumni Achievement Award. And they looked it up. They're like, we know the professor if you want the name. And I was like, nope, don't want the name. I don't.
So he's probably heard.
So no, I don't know what happens to him or what's going on. But shout outs to him wherever he is, because he put me on a path.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad that he gave you that purpose. Methodology is questionable in my mind, but I'm glad he gave you that purpose. Katharine, Leah has a good question here.
Can you elaborate more on the effects of the systemic burden that requires women, and particularly Black women, to be perfect and work twice as hard in order to succeed?
Wow, that's a question. So I think through my education and my professional career, I was very aware of my Blackness and how it relates to a space, right? You know, I'll go into a conference room and I'm setting up the computer to do the presentation, and they're like, oh, I would like coffee with some milk. And I'm like, I'll have the secretary get that for you, but I'm going to run this project for you, right? So I had to I was very aware of my race in spaces. It wasn't until I became a mother that I really started to understand some of the burdens that women face. Like I kind of assumed a lot of things were on my race and not on my gender, until I became a mom and realized how inadequate the built environment and the profession has prepared for us and the needs that we have. And then so I'm saying all this to say there's a level of empathy and sympathy that we need to acknowledge. There's certain roles that we can kind of step into, or shoes that we can step into and kind of understand what the problems are. But there's some that I'll never step into to really fully understand. So I try to make space for anyone to bring forward the burden that they're carrying so that they can speak to it, because I might just not be unaware. And even though I'm unaware, that education will allow us to be more empathetic and therefore create opportunities for justice and opportunities for them to come into the space to provide that justice. Now, when it comes to justice, double work twice as hard, I hold myself at a very high caliber. I really do not try to be late for deadlines. I don't know if it's so much self-imposed or it's systematic of how I've learned it. but I really carry that torch of that I need to be the definition of excellence at everything I do at all times. And sometimes that's great because it yields really great opportunities working with my hero, Sir David Adjaye. Shout out to the person who asked the question, how to pronounce that, to having a wonderful supportive family, to the kind of work that I'm working on, to the acknowledgments and the awards that I've received, to the roles and responsibilities that I have, is clearly a byproduct of it, but is definitely pressure that I'm feeling. And what you'll notice in conversations specifically about women is when we're thinking about promotions, I'll hear people say, oh, well, she's engaged. Are we sure she's going to really be around? This is the thing that we're talking about in terms of that flexibility that we need to acknowledge, that is required, that it's not just a woman's thing. Two people need to come together to make this baby happen, or sometimes even more, right? So let's not just burden one side of the equation in terms of their ability to stay in the profession. Let's not always assume that it's going to be the woman's role to be the primary caretaker of the child, right? We need to just kind of debunk and kind of synthesize and pull these things apart and really think about family as not an individual sport, but a collective. And also, having a child doesn't establish your value, right? People have parents who are ill, or family members or siblings. This is why the profession needs to be more flexible in regards to creating a capacity for us to be there for those who love us and who we love at the same time. So I'm so sorry, Leah. I know you're amazing. And I do not know that I fully answered your question in all its totality. I do think some of it is systematic and from conversations and what I'm hearing and seeing. Others is self-imposed on what I think excellence has meant. And because of that, right, that burden, right, also created opportunity within it. So I try to acknowledge it and move it forward as well. And then I also try to maintain as much as my identity as I possibly can. Now, today is a bad point in example, but I typically wear my hair curly. And I typically wear my curly in a big, huge curly afro all the time, because this idea that my hair has to be straight to look professional was something that I really had to fight against. That was a struggle that I did for 2 years. And that was because I became pregnant and I wanted my son to see beauty in himself. And how can I do that if I was religious about flat ironing my hair every week, right? And so I have really embraced the identity of having more natural hair kind of expressions, and do a conference where I'm lecturing in front of 1,300 people with curly hair, right? Or I'm going to be President Obama one day. It'll probably be with curly hair, right? So just kind of holding my identity as well, and kind of trying to understand and self-reflect what are those imposed ideals that is holding me back, and which ones I want to dismantle and which ones I want to maintain and use it as a way of enforcing me through other parts.
All right, let's talk about hair for a minute. not really, but well, it's a good example though. You know, we have weeks like this on Context and Clarity where we discuss topics that are not always the easiest topics, most comfortable topics. I know that there are people that won't show up for these conversations because they're uncomfortable talking about something in the realm of justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. I get that. I also get the fact that I'm the proverbial middle-aged white guy in the room, right? So you're talking about flat ironing hair to look more professional. I don't have enough hair, never have had enough hair to flat iron. So there's already a disconnect there. How do we have conversations and include everybody around the table, even when it's uncomfortable, even when there's no way for me, you know, your story about the professor blows my mind, right? No one's ever told me that. I'm not a young African-American woman. So how do we have these conversations? And maybe the better way to frame the question is, if you are a person in a firm, or you're an individual, how can you invite people to the table for these types of conversations, understanding that not everybody is going to be on the same wavelength, have the same understanding, have the same comfort levels for these topics that we're talking about?
Well, I think that's why when I talked about empathy versus sympathy, right? That there's just some things you're not going to be able to relate to, like what it feels like to have a hot comb hit the top of your ear. There's a very few people in this chat that can actually know what that feels like in that kind of pain. But I say all that to say it's about actually being honest about the authority you're giving people, because it's a trust building exercise. I'm trusting you and your community to share my stories, right? And with that, I'm holding accountable to everything that I'm saying in this conversation. But what if I said to you, hey, community, I want you to come in and tell me about all the things that are bothering you. And then I come in and I tell you, and then you're like, man, that girl Pascale, she's a complainer. All right, don't put her on the project because she's gonna say something about her hair or whatever. Then it cannot be used against me. And or don't have me sit here and tell you all the things that are bothering me from a lens of injustice, equity, diversity, inclusivity in this organization or in this firm or in this whatever, and then do absolutely nothing to change it. Because the next time somebody asks me, I'm going to be like, no comment. I got nothing to say. There's no point, because I'm re-traumatizing myself to share what's happening, and I don't see an outcome that serves me and or my community in any regard. And that is a similar statement when we do community engagement for projects. Please stop asking community people to come in and fill surveys and come eat cold pizza and some flat soda to talk about your project and get post-it notes of what they want, and then once they move, go, that doesn't match my aesthetic, it doesn't matter. Because the next person who comes to that community and says, hey, I want to engage you, they'll be like, man, keep it. And that's what I'm saying. We need to really, really, really be systematic and understanding that when we say uncomfortable conversations, uncomfortable for who? I'm in a constant state of uncomfortability. So why are we acknowledging your discomfort to have a conversation when we're not excusing the fact that I'm already living in that space? So incomfortability is an irrelevance for me. I want to know about the action. When I tell you this, what's going to happen? Are you going to say, wow, that was interesting, and just go about your day and maintain the same thing that you've always been doing? Or am I motivating or inspiring somebody on this community to do something different, to evaluate and assess differently? And I think earlier in our conversation, I said, I do not represent all of us because I'm unique, right? And I don't even represent my family. Me and my sister are very unique and different, right? And so these requests for information, these requests for engagement needs to be bespoke, and it needs to be authentic, and it needs to have accountability, and it cannot be burdened in terms of that action to be on the person who told you what is hurting them. It cannot be, man, you go through all that, all right, cool, you should start this diversity and inclusion committee, and then you should put all this program that really starts to sets that out. We're going to put 0 hours on your timesheet towards it, so this is really going to be like your overtime and your weekends to do this, and then hopefully one day you'll find justice. No, that whole exchange is completely unjust. So really thinking about, okay, here's how we as an organization, as leadership, are invested in making change. So you giving us this information, and we're only asking for information, we intend to do something about it through, then let's build. And once we accomplish this and we build on that trust, I can share more. And that's the exchange that we want to do. And that's for any community, right? That's women, that's people of color, that's people with disabilities, that's people who are in the LGBTQ plus. Like, it's everyone needs the space to talk about things that are not typical, and they need that opportunity. That's why I put my preferred pronouns, because I'm assuming that I don't assume what all of you guys think it is, right? I need to maintain that and provide that empathy in a space to say that some people might change theirs to say they, them. Some might say he, him. And I might not have assumed that. And that's the point. We assume a norm. We assign an image. There are a few magazines that says, oh, which icon architect are you? And it's a bald person with black glasses. I'm like, okay, how does this person look like me? Why are we putting an avatar of a particular gender and race when we're talking about this profession? We cannot do this. And so on all levels, I found the pettiness in me to fight that, kind of just breaking those ideals across and making sure that we're accessible and diverse as much as possible.
I love it. Katharine, you had a question.
Just added my pronouns.
Aw, thank you, Katharine.
Yeah. Well, okay. So Israel wanted to know, what is the world that you want to see? So that's a big question for not very much time left, but
Are you saying that I talk too much? No, I'm kidding. The
No, this
world
just
that
seems
I
like
want
a
to see.
big question, right? A lot of answer
We
to
can
that one.
keep going as long as you've got.
Well, I would say the world that I want to see is one that's free of racism, sexism, and other forms of oppression. So much of the work that I do with NOMA, with AIA, with NCARB, with NAB is really about finding and sussing out the systematic issues and dismantling it. I get so tired of breaking shackles every day and chains every day. I get so amped and excited about celebrating and elevating. Does society look like in a just world? That's what I want to see. So the world I want to see is one that's finally free from deburdening people with oppressions and injustices, and actually seeing people flourish and fly in their true selves and identities, and through their passions. That is absolutely the world that I want to see.
That's an amazingly beautiful vision. Um, this is another one of those conversations that I'm going to feel bad that we actually have to wrap this up because we could keep
Oh,
going for a couple of hours here, I think. But you might your office may not support you being on Context and Clarity for 3 hours on Thursday.
actually, I must say, and I have to shout out Adjaye Associates here because when coming here, my first week, and this is a true story, I promise, I called my mom when I logged in to do my timesheets for the first time. And at the top of the kind of timesheet system has, PTO, holiday, general, and then advocacy
Oh
as
wow,
like
it's
as part
amazing.
of the template timesheet. So it's like to be in a space where, in an organization, in a firm, in a studio that hits design excellence on every level across the world, to prioritize advocacy to the point where it's a default in timesheets. Man, I've never seen something so beautiful in my life. And I know I can geek out a little bit about timesheets, but I just thought that it just was such a good indicator of the kind of support that I have here, that I can have these conversations during work, that it doesn't need to be like, can we do this live at 7 p.m. when I'm home? Because, my previous office would never allow that, right? And so I think creating opportunities in firms as firm leaders and organization leaders on this in this community, creating space and opportunity for people to lend their voice to these conversations, to show their expertise in these discussions, is also equally important, because half of us are just afraid of upsetting our bosses to not do these things that would upset them, that they miss out in having positions of leadership and exposure. So again, shout out to Adjaye Associates for providing this system of support that's not just for me, but for everyone who works here.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. So if
Oh, thank you,
there's some
Jay.
nice sentiment. um, if what's the one thing that everybody in the audience needs to do today? In light of everything that you've shared with us, and getting to your vision, right? The vision of the world that you want to see. What's the one thing that everybody needs to do today?
Today, everyone needs to take a few deep breaths, center and ground themselves in what they need, and then really think about the full pipeline of what it means to be in this profession. Identify which part makes their heart flutter, that they find to be innately powerful for them, and then get involved. Get involved, whether that be through AIA, get involved, whether that be through NOMA, get involved, whether that be through Beyond the Built Environment, but get involved. And it doesn't need to be a whole new organization that you're building. It could be mentoring one person, it could be participating in your community, it could be helping create graphics for a community rally, whatever it is, but just get involved. But I think the moments in the time of sitting back and letting other people solve this very big issue is a hard one to continue. That we will all benefit from collaborating with you, and you don't need to feel that you need to solve the entire burden yourself, but a little piece of it will go a very long way. So I would just want everyone to get involved in a place that feels authentic and accurate to them.
Amazing. I love that. We talk about authenticity a lot, and that really rang true in everything that you are and everything that you talked about. So, Pascale Sablan, thank you for this wonderful conversation today. The inspiration that hopefully we'll all act on coming out of this conversation today as well. Again, if you're out there maybe you're with us live right now, or maybe you're watching the replay of this later. Beyondthebuilt.com is the website for Beyond the Built environment. I challenged you earlier to go to beyondthebuilt.com, say it with media, and go and request that the leaders, the people in these publications, sign on to these initiatives that Pascale is talking about. Also, if you would like, and I would encourage you to go and check out over on Instagram, Pascale's Instagram handle. You can see it there, Pascale Sablan, and the Instagram handle for Beyond the Built is there as well. Both, actually, I live vicariously through both of them. I stalk both of them. So go check them both out. They're very different. One is Pascale's personal, and one is Beyond the Built. And it's really interesting what Pascale does with the Beyond the Built. So I'm not going to tell you any more about that. Just go check that out. I love both of them. So again, Pascale, thank you for this. For everybody that's out there in the audience, thank you. Thank you for, I say this all the time, but thank you for making context and clarity a thing. We are, let me just check really quickly here. We are roughly 400 and, sorry, I've got to scroll a minute. We are roughly 460 conversations in at this point.
Wow.
And it's only because of all of you in the audience that keep this going. And it's only because you keep this going, you make context and clarity a thing, that we have the opportunity to have this conversation with Pascale. So thank you for making this a thing. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for your questions and your comments. I hope that you will all be well and be safe. Take care of yourself. It's a crazy world out there right now. So take some time to breathe and relax and rejuvenate, because we're going to do this again tomorrow. So take care of yourselves, and I hope that I will see you all somewhere sometime soon.
Thank you.